Well, hey there, guys. I'm Axel the Beast of ZeldaDungeon.net, and I'm sorry there was no mailbag this week. Largely, it's because of Christmas stuff, and that's also the reason I haven't, shaven. This isn't another mustache phase. I've just been really busy with Christmas preparations and whatnot. But this video is going to be about, Skyward Sword and its similarities to Twilight Princess, because, really, they were actually very similar games in a number of ways. I mean, some people, I've heard someone say that some other people have said. I know this is a terribly accurate assessment, but some people have supposedly maybe kind of possibly said that the game is just like Twilight Princess, which I don't think is true at all. I mean, granted, there's going to be a lot of huge similarities between any Zelda game, really, but that's not really like a problem, really. I mean, there's always some very heavy similarities between all Zelda games, but they always have a lot of unique little things, too, and the fact that they stay largely the same is not a bad thing. I mean, that's a criticism the series gets, but other series do that too, so it's not like it's a thing unique to Zelda. It's a common thing in video games in general. It doesn't need to change completely. It should stay similar to how it's been, because that's what makes it what it is. But I definitely don't think Skyward Sword is exactly like Twilight Princess. There's quite a lot of differences, but that said, it is very similar. Now, I've heard people I've heard someone I was talking to once say that they wanted there to be a sequel to Twilight Princess because because all the major console games kind of get a follow-up game. Like Ocarina of Time had, Majora's Mask, and, the Wind Waker had Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, so they were saying Twilight Princess should have one, and I think it kind of did. I think Skyward Sword is the sequel to Twilight Princess. Obviously, it's actually a prequel to the game, like, to all the games, but at the same time, it's pretty much a follow-up to Twilight Princess and its themes and even its story a little bit. I mean, there's some really obvious references to Twilight Princess even within the world of the game. I mean, there's the obvious stuff like the provinces and the dragons, which bear the names of the provinces, and the light spirits of Twilight Princess and are pretty much clearly the same places and entities. But then there's also stuff like the story themes. I mean, I made all those Dark Tribe theories a while back, and while they're, not solid, they're a little ambiguous at times, there are still some very heavy similarities between, the backstory of Twilight Princess with the Dark Interlopers and whatnot, and the Demon Tribe stuff in, Skyward Sword, mainly because of the involvement of, the dragons and whatnot. I mean, it's theoretical, but there's still thematic similarities there, and, there's other stuff like people like to theorize now that Skyward Sword Link is actually the hero shade, and, then there's stuff like, the characters who are, like, totally the same archetypes as in Twilight Princess. Like, you have Girahim, which is basically the psychotic, unstable, pawn subordinate character, just like Zant was. But then you have, you have Demise, who's very Ganon-like, and even the final battle with Demise is very similar to the final battle with Ganondorf from Twilight Princess. And then you have, like, Fi and how similar she is to Midna. I mean, not in terms of personality, they're completely different, but they have the same basic gameplay design and the same basic, rough character design if you compare Midna's true form to Fi's appearance. They have a similar body type or whatnot, but then they also have things like, their freaking gibberish language that they both speak, that, it's the same thing, and you don't see that in other Zelda games. And, of course, there's, like, the Siren World with the Twilight Realm. There's just a lot of things, like that, and there's a lot of similarities in the plot and in the characters and in the ideas, and even elements of the soundtrack are similar, because Twilight Princess was one of the, the Wind Waker kind of started this, I think, mostly. But Twilight Princess took it further with the idea of a dynamic soundtrack where the songs change depending on what's going on. This was especially prevalent with, like, the battle music, but also, like, Hyrule Field and when you fought a boss and you were about to do some damage to the boss, it would play some extra heroic music. And they do all that stuff in Skyward Sword, too. I mean, every area really has a multitude of different, variations on the song that'll play in different moments, especially dungeon themes. And, they do that thing with the boss's, the boss's weak points as well. And, there's even songs that are directly similar, like the cave theme in Skyward Sword almost sounds like something out of Twilight Princess, or, even better example, is the training theme, which plays briefly in Skyward Sword when Zelda is teaching you how to fly your bird for the first time, because it's almost identical to the training/practice theme from Twilight Princess, a cartoony version of which plays when you're learning to use the slingshot, but also a much more, like, epic version plays when the hero shade is teaching you, a hidden skill. So, you know, there's all those similarities. There's also a huge number of gameplay similarities, too. You know, there's the hidden skills, which, you know, there was a bunch of them in Twilight Princess, and they didn't really carry that system over into Skyward Sword, but they did have two of the hidden skills from Twilight Princess appear as normal techniques you use constantly in Skyward Sword, and that was the Shield Bash and the Ending Blow. But actually, the similarities between the combat of both games, it really doesn't end with the hidden skills, because there's really a, you know, both games are actually arguably the most combat-focused titles of the series. Twilight Princess is really a lot of the time about sword-dueling enemies and fighting enemies. They have a high number of those, you know, humanoid-type enemies that you can really have sword battles with and, you know, use the hidden skills on, as opposed to the monster-like enemies, although there's still a lot of those. And Skyward Sword carries that, you know, continues that, and instead of the hidden skills, they have all the, you know, the Wii Motion Plus stuff and the dynamic control of the sword. So there's this, they're arguably the most combat-focused games of the series. I mean, you don't see other games in the series where you're fighting that much, and there's so much emphasis on just fighting enemies. I mean, in Twilight Princess, it's really, even dungeons are a lot about fighting, not just the puzzles, and that's true of Skyward Sword as well. And, you know, both games also have a similarity in the boss design in some ways as well. I mean, the two phases for nearly every boss. In addition to how the bosses are pretty freaking huge. I mean, a lot of previous Zelda games actually have humongous bosses, but in some of the older games it was a little more subdued. And to be fair, in Skyward Sword it's a little more subdued than it was in Twilight Princess. I mean, you're not fighting as many freaking titanic monsters. I mean, Tantalus is probably the best example. Tantalus and Levius are the biggest bosses in Skyward Sword, pretty much. But even the smaller monsters, although there's a little more variety, are still pretty big, and it's just this emphasis on large boss monsters like Twilight Princess had. And then, you know, you get down to all the little similarities, like how the characters' mouths move during cutscenes, or, you know, how the quest status screen and the inventory screens are separated, and, you know, it just, even in a more abstract way, like, you're not even going over all these specific similarities, the games just feel very similar, and, like, they're based on the same ideas, you know, like, they took a lot of what they made in Twilight Princess, and they put it in Skyward Sword, and they based it off the same stuff. I mean, that's really kind of how it feels with the game, and, you know, there are even design similarities with, like, the dungeons, because, you know, in Twilight Princess you had a lot of tight corridors and whatnot, and in Skyward Sword you have Skyview Temple, which, it felt like a Twilight Princess dungeon to me. The way the map screens are dealt with in the dungeons, just the whole navigational method in the dungeon, a lot of design aspects feel similar, even though Skyward Sword does generally deviate a lot from that. There's another dungeon that feels like Skyview that feels like it kind of comes directly out of Twilight Princess, and that was the Sand Ship, because it's roughly around the same point in the game where you'd go to, you know, Snow Peak Ruins in Twilight Princess. It might actually be exactly the same time. I'm not sure. I'm not going to, you know, spend a minute here trying to count the dungeons. But, you know, Snow Peak Ruins was one of the most unique dungeons in Skyward Sword because it was just like this really odd theme. It was an odd kind of idea or structure for a dungeon. It was a mansion. But it also had, like, a lot of floors and a lot of tiny rooms, and the room layout was really designed to make it feel like the structure it was, which was a mansion. The Sand Ship has a ton of rooms, the most rooms and floors of any dungeon in Skyward Sword, and it's designed to fit the structure that it was, and that is a ship. It feels like one. So, you know, those are two very similar ideas, and there's a lot of things like that in Skyward Sword in general. They just feel like a lot of ideas that are like Twilight Princess, and it just has a very similar feel. I mean, obviously the art style and the storyline, you know, tone is different, but at the same time, there's elements of the story in Skyward Sword which are unbelievably dark and creepy, and it does mirror Twilight Princess's storyline in that regard, because, you know, that game, despite, you know, whether you think it's the darkest Zelda or not, it did definitely have a lot of those dramatic, dark moments, and I think Skyward Sword, and, you know, mimicked that quite a lot. So yeah, I think both games are very similar. I think that Skyward Sword is pretty much the follow-up to Twilight Princess, even though it's a prequel, and I just feel like, you know, they're very similar games, and Skyward Sword took a lot of what Twilight Princess did wrong and kind of did better with it. Although, Skyward Sword has its own flaws, and I do think that they should probably try to follow up on it with something similar in the future. But, you know, it's already the sequel, so who knows if a sequel will get a sequel. Hopefully it will, but, you know, we never know. It would be the first time that well, not really the first time that a major console release was followed by a major console release. That did happen with Majora's Mask, but Majora's Mask was also, I don't know. Anyway, be sure to tell me what you guys think about the whole, Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess similarity thing in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.